In every great civilization, there comes a moment when decline begins not with an explosion, but with a whisper, a barely noticeable tremor beneath the surface, a small shift in numbers, a silent change in confidence. And history shows us, over and over again, that the collapse of a currency is one of the most devastating and silent disasters a nation can experience. No earthquake, flood, or war can destroy a society as completely as the death of its money. Every empire in history believed it was too powerful to fall. Rome thought its gold would last forever. The Ottoman Empire believed its coinage could survive political chaos. The Weimar Republic thought it could print its way out of debt. Modern nations like Argentina, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Turkey, and Greece believed the same. They believed collapse was something that only happened to other countries. But collapse does not care about pride. It listens only to mathematics, trust, and time. This is the story of the currency trap, a deadly cycle that has destroyed 5 nations in the modern world. A trap created by overspending, by debt, by political denial, and by the belief that printing money is a shortcut to prosperity. A trap that begins as a solution and ends as a disaster. A trap that has now begun tightening around the United States. Imagine a massive machine, an economic engine, running smoothly for decades. For generations, people trust it. They build their lives around it. They save in its currency, work for its currency, and dream in its currency. But inside the machine, a single gear begins to crack. Slowly, quietly, silently. No alarms go off. No lights flash. Life continues, but that crack grows, and soon it spreads to other gears. Eventually, the entire machine shakes under the weight of its own pressure. That is how currencies die. They do not collapse in a single day. They erode inch by inch until the final moment comes suddenly. To understand the danger America faces today, we must go back, not to centuries-old civilizations, but to 5 modern countries whose collapses were witnessed by the world in real time. 5 nations that believed they were stable, modern, and powerful, until their currencies betrayed them. Argentina, once one of the richest nations on earth, destroyed itself by printing money to fund its ambitions. Families watched their life savings lose value overnight. Generations lost trust in their own currency. Inflation didn't just rise, it devoured everything. Greece, the birthplace of Western civilization, drowned in debt and denial. Its leaders insisted everything was under control, but the numbers told a different story. When the collapse came, pensions vanished, salaries shrank, and banks shut their doors. Venezuela, rich with oil and natural resources, believed it was untouchable. It printed money at historic levels, convinced that its wealth would shield it from the consequences. It didn't. Hyperinflation turned cash into a worthless burden. People used money as wallpaper, not currency. Turkey watched its currency fall again and again as political interference shattered economic stability. Prices soared, confidence broke. Foreign investors fled, the economy spiraled, and Zimbabwe, infamous for creating the largest banknote in human history, $100 trillion, proved that even a nation blessed with resources can fall to political ego, monetary abuse, and economic denial. 5 nations, 5 versions of the same script, 5 victims of the same silent killer. But here is the part almost no one wants to accept. The United States, the world's largest economic empire, is now following the same blueprint. The warning signs are no longer subtle. They are loud, visible, undeniable. The U.S. is spending far more than it earns. Its national debt is rising at a speed never before seen in history. Its government borrows money just to pay interest on old debt. Its central bank prints money to solve problems that printing money actually caused. And inflation, once a rare visitor, is now a permanent resident in the American economy. The American people feel it in their groceries, gas, rent, and everyday lives. Prices rise, savings shrink, salaries fall behind. Yet politicians insist the situation is temporary, manageable, or under control. The same words spoken by every collapsing nation before the fall. But the true danger isn't just inflation. It is the loss of trust. Because a currency is not paper. It is belief. Once belief fades, collapse accelerates. Across the world, countries are slowly stepping away from the US dollar. Trade deals between powerful nations are being signed in other currencies. Alliances are forming to bypass the dollar entirely. Foreign nations are reducing their US Treasury holdings. BRICS is building a new financial system, and global powers are preparing for a world that is no longer dollar dominant. This is not speculation. This is preparation. Whether Americans realize it or not, the US is entering a new era, an era where the rest of the world no longer sees the dollar as invincible. Every currency collapse in history follows the same three-stage cycle. Stage 1, comfort. The country believes it is strong, powerful, and protected. People trust the system, and leaders feel unstoppable. Stage 2, cracks begin. Debt rises, inflation grows. Political arguments replace economic truth. The public feels the pressure, but is told everything is fine. Stage 3, the avalanche confidence breaks. Foreign trust disappears. The currency devalues. Collapse comes suddenly. Days or weeks, not years. Right now, the United States is standing between Stage 2 and Stage 3. This is the moment when history whispers its warnings. This is the moment when emperors look invincible. This is the moment when ordinary people continue life as normal, unaware of the storm preparing to break. And when the currency trap closes, it closes quickly, without mercy, without pause, without warning. This documentary begins here, at the edge of a global shift, at the moment before change, at the point where the world's most powerful nation may be walking into the same trap that destroyed 5 others. The lights dim, the narration slows, the screen fades to black, and the journey into the truth begins. History has a way of leaving clues hidden in the economic charts, political speeches, newspaper archives, and the personal diaries of citizens who lived through collapse. When we examine the 5 nations destroyed by the currency trap, a terrifying clarity emerges. Each collapse was different in detail, but identical in structure. Different cultures, different leaders, different economies, yet the same mathematical chain reaction brought them all to their knees. To understand what may soon unfold in the United States, we must first understand the blueprint, not theory, not opinion, pattern. Because when 5 nations walk into the same fire and a 6th begins following their exact footprints, the outcome is not a mystery, it is a countdown. Let's start with Argentina, the poster child of repeated collapse. At the start, Argentina was wealthy, extremely wealthy. In the early 1900s, it was richer than Japan, France, and even parts of the United States. But ambition turned into carelessness. Governments began spending more than they earned. Budgets inflated. Public programs multiplied. Politicians offered easy benefits to win votes. And when revenue failed to keep up, they turned to the printing press. Each year, a little more. Each crisis, a little more. Each election, a little more. Soon the peso began to fall. Prices rose faster than salaries. Savings lost value. And by the time the nation realized what had happened, inflation was so embedded in daily life that trust in the currency was gone forever. Now compare that to Greece, whose collapse was rooted not in printing money, but in borrowing it. Greece spent far beyond its means, not in its own currency, but in the euro, a currency it could not print. Debt piled up like a mountain. Governments changed, but spending didn't. Budgets were falsified. Warnings were ignored. The European Union eventually intervened, but by then the damage was irreversible. Banks shut down. ATMs stopped dispensing cash. People lined up at dawn hoping they could withdraw a few euros before the machines ran empty. A modern nation reduced to survival mode. Then comes Venezuela, one of the richest oil nations on earth. It should have been financially invincible. Instead, it became the most dramatic collapse of the 21st century. The government printed money at breathtaking speed to fund massive public spending. When inflation started, they printed more. When shortages appeared, they printed more. When salaries couldn't keep up, they printed even more. Inflation didn't just rise, it exploded. A cup of coffee cost millions of bolivars. People carried backpacks of cash just to buy bread. The currency became so worthless that some citizens used the bills for artwork, origami, or fuel for cooking fires. Turkey followed a similar path, but with a twist. Instead of massive printing, political interference in monetary policy caused the lira to collapse again and again. Central banks were pressured, interest rates were manipulated, confidence evaporated, foreign investors fled, the lira fell, recovered briefly, then fell harder. Prices soared, families struggled. Every attempt to stabilize the currency only pushed the nation deeper into the trap. And then there is Zimbabwe, perhaps the most extreme example in human history. When the government printed money without limit, the currency spiraled until it became meaningless. The $100 trillion note became a global joke. But for the citizens living through it, the situation was no joke. It was desperation, hunger, and societal breakdown. 5 collapses, 5 pathways, 5 different political ideologies, 5 distinct economies. Yet underneath the surface, one identical formula. 1. Overspending. Governments promise more than they can afford. Public programs expand. Budgets become unrealistic. 2. Debt explosion. Borrowing fills the gap. Interest grows faster than revenue. Loans become unmanageable. 3. Currency manipulation. Printing money becomes policy. Leaders claim it's temporary. Inflation begins quietly. 4. Trust erodes. People lose faith in savings. Foreign creditors step back. Investors flee. SFUI. Collapse. Prices skyrocket. Currency freefalls. Society fractures. Now look at the United States through the same lens. America spends trillions more than it earns every year. The national debt has grown so large that even the interest payments, just the interest, have surpassed major national budgets like defense, education, and healthcare. And to pay these enormous costs, the government borrows even more. When borrowing isn't enough, the Federal Reserve prints money. When printing causes inflation, the government blames external factors. When inflation grows, politicians reassure people it's transitory. But the numbers don't lie. The patterns don't lie. History doesn't lie. The U.S. is now spending, borrowing, and printing on a scale that rivals, if not exceeds, the 5 nations that collapsed before it. The very warning signs those nations ignored are now flashing in America like bright red alarms. Consider this chilling fact. When a nation's interest payments grow faster than its economy, collapse becomes inevitable. This is the exact point Argentina, Greece, and Turkey reached right before the fall, and the United States has crossed that point. Now consider global trust. For decades, nations around the world stored their wealth in dollars. They bought American bonds. They used the dollar for trade. They believed in the stability of the U.S. But today, that confidence is fading. Nations are buying less U.S. debt. Trade deals are being signed in other currencies. Global powers are building new systems to bypass the dollar. BRICS expansion is accelerating. Countries are storing their gold reserves domestically instead of in the U.S. Central banks worldwide are quietly shifting away from the dollar. This shift is not dramatic, yet it is subtle, quiet, strategic. Exactly how every major global financial transition begins. And inside the U.S., ordinary citizens are feeling the early symptoms of economic illness. Rising prices, shrinking savings, and salaries that no longer keep up. These were the first signals in every nation that later collapsed. The people felt it before the politicians admitted it. The U.S. financial system is not collapsing today, but it is moving in the direction every collapsed nation once moved. When you place America's trajectory over the blueprint of the 5 fallen nations, it aligns almost perfectly, step by step, stage by stage, warning by warning, which leads us to the next question. What happens when the world's largest economy enters the final stage of the currency trap? The answer is not just national, it is global. A U.S. currency crisis would not be a regional event. It would reshape world trade, global alliances, financial markets, and political structures. We stand not at the end, but at the middle of the greatest monetary transformation in modern history. The blueprint is unfolding, the signs are clear, and the consequences are coming. When a currency collapses, it never happens in a single moment. It happens in silence, in shadows, and in slow motion. long before the world realizes something irreversible has begun. Hyperinflation doesn't start with wheelbarrows of cash. It begins with one decision, one emergency policy, one temporary measure that becomes permanent, one bailout that becomes a habit, one manipulation that becomes a necessity. And by the time the nation wakes up, it's already drowning. In the final chapter of this story, the consequences of the currency trap finally reveal themselves, brutally, clearly, and without mercy. The first sign of a dying currency: trust evaporates before prices rise, before markets crash, before banks fail. The very first sign is invisible. People lose faith. Faith in the government, faith in the central bank, faith in the value of their own money. You can print currency infinitely, but you cannot print trust. In Argentina, trust collapsed long before the peso did. In Zimbabwe, people knew the money was dead, even while the government insisted it was strong. In Venezuela, shopkeepers stopped accepting their own national currency months before the world realized the entire economy was broken. When citizens stop believing in their money, the currency is already gone. And today, surveys show growing distrust in the U.S. Federal Reserve, Congress, and banks. The strongest currency on earth is facing the same psychological breakdown that triggered collapse in other nations. The second sign: an economy that survives only on printed money. A healthy economy grows from production. A weak economy grows from consumption. A dying economy grows from printed money. In all 5 nations that collapsed, governments passed a point of no return. They needed new money not to grow, but simply to survive, to pay debts, to fund programs, to calm protests, to avoid elections going wrong. Every day began and ended with one question: how much do we need to print today? In the United States, the government now needs trillions just to keep the system running, not to grow it. This is the exact same decline Japan faced, the same decline Germany faced, the same decline Rome faced 700 years ago. When printing becomes the fuel of survival, collapse becomes the end of the story. The third sign: extremes become normal. Every currency crash follows the same emotional path: denial, anger, blame, fear, panic, collapse. Governments deny the crisis. Citizens blame politicians. Banks blame inflation. Inflation blames global conditions. And slowly, the country begins normalizing the abnormal. Prices rise 10%. Not bad. Housing becomes unaffordable. A temporary imbalance. National debt skyrockets. Nothing to worry about. But abnormal never stays harmless. It always transforms into chaos. In Venezuela, food lines became normal. In Argentina, currency controls became normal. In Turkey, 60% inflation became normal. In Lebanon, banks shutting down became normal. And in the United States, trillion-dollar deficits and endless debt are becoming normal. This is how nations fall, not suddenly, but gradually. The fourth sign: the world escapes the currency. One by one, nations begin abandoning the collapsing currency. Long before the collapse becomes official, they trade in gold. They price commodities in other currencies. They make side agreements. They quietly walk out the back door. When global trade no longer needs a currency, that currency loses its throne. This is what happened to the British pound in the 20th century. It ruled the world for 200 years, until slowly, quietly, trade moved elsewhere. Today, several countries are already reducing reliance on the US dollar. Oil trade deals bypassing USD, BRICS nations launching alternative payment systems, central banks buying record amounts of gold. The world doesn't announce the end of a currency, it simply stops using it. The final sign: the people turn against their own money. This is where every currency collapse ends. People stop saving, people stop investing, people stop believing. They move to gold, they move to real estate, they move to foreign currencies, they move to anything except the money printed by their own government. A nation collapses the moment its own people escape its currency. And when the population stops holding money, the government begins forcing them to. Capital controls, withdrawal limits, transaction monitoring, mandatory digital IDs, restrictions on foreign assets, new forms of digital currency that can be tracked, frozen, or expired. This final move always comes under the disguise of protection, but it is the greatest warning of all. When a government tightens control over money, it means the currency is already in its death stage. The future. What happens if the U.S. follows the same path? If the United States enters the same cycle that destroyed 5 nations before it, the consequences will be global. Prices rising faster than wages. Housing becoming permanently unreachable. Banks restricting withdrawals. The stock market swinging violently. The dollar losing global dominance. Savings evaporating. Government expanding digital control. A historic shift of power from public to private elites. The middle class collapsing under financial pressure. But collapse is not the end. It is the beginning of a new phase. Every fallen currency is replaced by something stronger. Gold in ancient times. Barter in crisis times. Foreign currency in modern times. Digital or controlled currency in the future. The question is not whether the US dollar will change. The question is, who will control what replaces it? Governments, corporations, banks, tech giants, or the people? This is the battle of the century, and it has just begun. Final message, the warning every American must hear. Nations do not collapse because they are weak. They collapse because they refuse to change. The same currency trap that destroyed Argentina, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Lebanon, and Turkey now looms over the United States. But collapse doesn't have to be doom. Collapse can be transformation if people prepare before the storm arrives. This story is not a prediction. It is a warning. Because the biggest danger isn't inflation, or debt, or collapse. The biggest danger is ignoring the signs.